Hello, I'm back. After much avoidance, people have been requesting a budgetary policy video, so here it is. Apologies it's so late. So what's the definition of budgetary policy? Well, you could read that, but in its basic form, it's just looking at how the government is going to manage its inflow of cash and its outflow of cash over the course of the next year. So why is the government budgeting stuff? Why are they trying to figure out what's the inflows, what's the outflows? Well, here it is. They are trying to achieve those 6 objectives. Now, they're not in a particular order. They're all equally weighted. It just depends on what the current economic crisis is what will be their main priority. So for example, today, we've got a cost of living crisis. We got housing issues, we got severe weather conditions, we got high inflation, what else have we got? We got China putting bans on our products. Well, they're starting to lighten up a little bit. There's so much going on in the economy, and the government has to figure out what can we do to make living standards better for everyone. So all these 6 here you would have encountered at some point in economics, whether it be in year 11 or year 12. So hopefully this is nothing new, such as full employment, price stability, etc, etc. I'm going to move on. What you want to know is, where does the government's major inflows, cash inflows or cash receipts come from? Well, if you look on the far right over here, what's this? 23, 24. So this year they think that majority of their money is going to come from company taxes, and it might be due to the changes that they're making on global multinational companies, making them pay at least 15% tax. But we'll see how they go. Compared to last year, you can see here that personal income tax made up the majority, company tax made up a little bit, well, the second biggest, and other taxes, which is a bunch of random stuff like luxury car tax, wine equalization tax. These are all little things added up together. But if you're looking for an honest third biggest form of tax, it's right here, GST, 73,498 million. It's hard to comprehend sometimes. These numbers are so damn big. So you got this, you got company tax, and you got personal income tax. All right. And you can see here, I actually looked at the wrong bloody date. This is 21-22. This is actually what their estimates are for this year. So they think they're going to get about $470 million $470,950 million from just income taxation receipts. Quite a big number. And it's trending upwards. Well, this one's trending downwards. Interesting. So they're predicting probably a fall in our GDP over the next year, which is highly plausible. Anyway, enough rambling. If you really want to take a look at where all the money comes from for the government, here's pretty much a rundown of it all. So take a look. Feel free to pause the screen. Next thing we need to note is direct versus indirect tax. So direct taxes, in simple form, is just the taxes that you pay from your income. Like what I've written here is the perfect definition. I highly suggest you run with this, but if you just need to understand what the hell's going on, it's just taxes from your earnings. So this could include personal income tax and capital gains tax. So indirect taxes are taxes charged on goods and services. So how can I put this? It's just taxes on spending. So whenever you spend and you pay tax, that's an indirect tax. Alright? Please, feel free to copy this word for word. This is almost a text. I'm pretty sure this is a textbook definition if you want to use it for your end of year exam and your SACs to get the full marks. Then you got the next problem. Progressive, regressive, or proportional tax. What are they? Well, progressive is where the tax increases as you earn more, such as personal income tax. As you can see here, let's look it up. What am I looking for? Personal income tax rates. Click here. There you go. If you're an Australian, which I assume you are if you're studying here, first $18,000 doesn't get taxed, but as soon as you start earning over $18,201, you start getting taxed 19%, and once you hit 45,000, every dollar after 45,001, starts getting taxed at 32.5%, and any money that you earn after 120,000 and a dollar goes to 37% tax, and once you hit over 180,000 and a dollar, they start taxing you at 45%. Now, don't fall into the trap where you think that, oh, I made $120,000, so I get taxed completely at 32%. No, it's a proportional tax, meaning each increment of your income gets taxed at a different rate, so your effective tax rate might be lower. So if I put this into a tax calculator for you, what did I say, 120,000? Is that enough zeros? It looks like it. What's the taxes here? Total tax is 31. Alright, so let's get a calculator out. 31,867 divided by 120,000 times 100. There you go, your effective tax rate. So that's after considering all the different taxes that you pay. It's 26.56%. So there you go. I hope that's a little eye-opener on how taxes work. Because, yeah, you're not going to get taxed this overall. You're getting taxed this overall. Alright. Regressive taxes. Regressive taxes are where the tax takes up a large proportion of low-income earners and starts taking a smaller proportion as your income grows. It's the opposite of progressive tax, and the best one we got is GST in Australia. Alright, I know it's a 10% tax, but you got to realize that 10% tax has a larger burden on low-income earners compared to high-income earners. For example, if a low-income earner pays $100 in GST, it takes up a larger proportion of their income versus the $100 GST on a high income earner. Alright, now the government knew this was going to be a problem. That's why GST has some clauses. So some essential goods don't have a GST. That ensures that, you know, our lowest income earners aren't heavily burdened by this type of regressive tax, which is nice of them. Yeah. Progressive taxes. Sorry, we already went for progressive. Proportional taxes. My favorite. It's where your tax percentage stays the same regardless of how much you earn. So if you make $1 million, or if you make $10 billion, or you make $1 trillion, you still get taxed the same percentage, whether it be 10%, 20%, or 30%. With our government, company tax rates are a bit funny. It used to be a flat rate for it all, but they changed it. So I'm pretty sure if the turnover is less than 50 million, you get taxed at 25%, and over 50 mil, yeah, it's over 30%. So here it is. I don't want to ask Alex for help. So turnover means how many sales you make. So if you make $50 million worth of sales and less, you get taxed at 25%. But once you're over 50 million, it's a 30% flat rate tax. So I guess it's still proportional in a way. Proportional as long as you stay within 50 billion, and still a proportion once you're over 50 mil. So it's a one tax, kinda. Alright. Major expenses. There's a lot here. So this blue section represents our current year, and you can compare it to last year and future predictions, which is always fun to do if you're a numbers nerd like me. So you can see here that healthcare is a huge number. Surprisingly, it's slightly lower than the year before. I guess COVID being not a big deal anymore, they didn't put as much money into the system as before, but yeah, it's still interesting to see that's gone down, especially with the Medicare changes that they're making. Well, we'll go into that later. Social security and welfare, so all those Centrelink payments are going up. So that's the second biggest expense. And what's another big one here? What's this? Transport, communications. Oh wait, how did I miss this one? Education. There you go. So, they're right next to each other. 1, 2, 3. So those are your major expenses for the government. And you can probably see why they always make changes to social security, welfare, healthcare and education, because well, if they can find ways to minimize it, it'll be better off for their budget bottom line. So this chart here gives you a good representation of the percentage of the total expenditure that happens in our country for this year, or budgeted for this year. So over 35% of the total spending is going straight for welfare, and then you got 15.6 going straight to healthcare, 7.1% going to education. Now remember, it's a budget. We have no idea what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Or actually, wait, our financial year just started, so we have no idea what's going to happen in the next 11 months. We could have a bushfire, we could have a flood, we could have another pandemic, who knows? These are just estimates, alright? So these numbers are not definitive. Alright, next thing you need to know. There's a lot of economic vocab in this bloody area of study. You need to know what the hell current, capital and transfer payments are. So current expenditure, capital expenditure and transfer payments. If you're an accounting student, think of your current expenditure like your operations on the cash flow system. Cash flow system? Wow, I can't even talk anymore. The cash flow statement. And capital expenditure like your investing activities on your cash flow statement. But for those who don't do accounting, current expenditure is where it's like a one-off payment that doesn't provide future economic benefits beyond, you know, that initial use. So things like wages for public servants, things like the electricity they use during the day. Once they consume the good, that's it. It's useless for the next day. They have to go buy some more of that good or use more of that good in order to feel some sort of benefit. With capital expenditure, usually this item that they buy, you know, doesn't just last for today. It lasts for tomorrow. It lasts for a few more years. It lasts for quite a long time. Well, you would assume it'll last quite a long time. So we got examples here of roads, rails, ports. I mean, the Westgate Bridge, for example, was built in the 70s and it's still working now. Fantastic piece of equipment. Not equipment. Infrastructure that helps Victorians move. And I'm glad they're doing the upgrade, but damn, it took them a long time to get there, didn't it? It's still not done. I digress. Transfer payments. Very similar to what you experienced in the balance of payments. Do you remember the 4 sections of the... Wow. I've already forgotten what they're called. What's those 4 sections called? The current account. Yeah, the current account. Of course it's the current account. Where you got BOGs, net primary income, net secondary income. Well, this is kind of like the net secondary income. So, a payment is made to someone without expecting anything in return. So, usually this is where the government gives people money. And usually it's through some sort of social security or welfare payment. Alright, so when they give job seeker, for example, that's a form of transfer payment. It's not a current expenditure. The government's not spending money, they're giving money. That's the key difference between the two. Oh. So we got some budget outcomes. So if their inflow of cash is the same as their outflow of cash, so if their receipts are the same as their outlays, it's called a balanced budget. If your receipts are less than your outlays, or if your cash inflow is less than your cash outflows, then you have a budget deficit. That means you spent more than you've made during that period of time. And then the surplus is the opposite. It means you've held on to more money than you spent during that period. So your receipts are greater than your outlays, or your cash inflows are greater than your cash outflows during that time. Alright, so what do you think currently we're heading for the 23-24 budget? I hope you realize it's a deficit. And last year we expected a deficit, but because of such amazing commodity prices and, you know, economic activity due to well, our commodities being worth so much because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, we've had a budget surplus. A very small one, but it's still a surplus. And I bet, you know, anyone who follows Labour are thinking, wow, they're great economic managers, and everyone who's following Liberals are probably thinking, well, that only occurred because of all the awesome economic management that they did in the last 10 years. And you know what? It's probably true. A combination of A and B is true. I'm not here to pick sides at the moment. Headline and underlying cash balance. Alright, so it's just kind of like your headline and underlying inflation. Headline cash balance is just black and white, the total amount of cash received versus the total amount paid. Where underlying, you exclude two things. Alright, the two exclusions are any sales or purchases of assets by the business. No, actually that's not true at all. It's any proceeds from the sale of assets. So one-off. For example, if they decide tomorrow that they're going to sell MB & Co for $1 trillion, well, it would be recorded in the headline balance as coming in, but underlying will exclude it. The reason why it's excluded is because that money won't be something that they should expect the year after, the year after that, or, you know, the year after that. With underlying, we want to see, well, how can I put this in a way that kind of makes sense? It gives us a better indication of, you know, how much money the government has based on economic conditions. That's what underlying cash balance does. So we got the exclusion of the one-off sale of assets, and you also got all the income that they earn from their future funds. The future funds is where the government sets aside money. It's kind of like a superannuation account where someone manages it for them and earns interest off that money. And you know, if a good project comes along, they will use that money in the future fund in order to fund whatever it may be. So yeah, in essence, headline, black and white, underlying, exclusions, future funds, and proceeds from sales. Alright. And underlying gives us a better indication of how much money we have based on economic conditions. So, our budget is estimated to give us a deficit of $13.9 billion. And you probably think to yourself, is that good? Is that bad? It's not bad. Considering how bad it's been in the past. This is a major surprise. I'm pretty sure it was 10 times higher during the actual pandemic itself. During 2020. But I could be wrong. It's been a while since I looked at the numbers, so don't quote me on that one. Alright, so we also need to know what the underlying cash balance is based off a percentage of GDP. So last year is 0.2% of GDP, so we had a surplus of 4.2, so it made up 0.2% of the GDP. And this year, we're expecting a $13.9 billion deficit, so spending more than we receive. And it's expected to be 0.5% of our GDP. So this year's budget is expected to create 0.5% of our GDP as a deficit. Alright? If you really want to look at the fine details, please go to budget.gov.au and click on the fiscal strategy and outlook. Document number 3. It's quite boring to read, trust me. It's long. Very long. So, the next question we need to answer is, alright, if the government does have a deficit, so they're spending more than they're receiving, well, where are they getting the money in order to make this spending occur? Well, in 2018, there was an exam question asking just that. How does the government finance a budget deficit? I think they need to mention 2 ways they can do it. I really don't remember. The exam was like 5 years ago at this point. I just remember most of my students walked out of that exam saying, oh yeah sir, I put taxes as the answer, and I'm just going, oh. So let me break down why taxes is not a way to finance a budget deficit. So let's just assume, you know, this year they want to spend $100 million more than they actually have. If you raise taxes, you have to wait for that money to trickle in. They need that $100 million now in order to spend it. So they need to borrow it. They can't raise taxes because taxes takes time to get the money. They don't have time. So that's why taxes is not a valid option when explaining how they finance a deficit. Taxes is a good way to return a budget to surplus, if that's what you want to use. So, these are the ways the government can finance a deficit. You could go for the RBA. The only problem is it creates the most expansionary AD and also the most dangerous for inflation because you're essentially injecting more money into an economy that never used to be there. Secondly, you can sell bonds to Australian investors. So everyday people like you or me or banks and big multi-corporations within Australia might have all this extra money lying around, and they're willing to give it to the government. Why? Well, because the government's too big to fail. And it's a sure bet that if you give them their money, you're guaranteed to get a percentage back that they stated. Unlike the share market, if you put the money there... Oh god, do I smell smoke? I'll be right back. Alright, false alarm. There was no damn fire. That was a bit of a scary moment. Checked around the house. We're all good. So, I think I was up to selling bonds to Australian investors. Yeah, I think I was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we were. Okay, so I've already explained that they could sell to anyone in Australia because it's really safe. And you know, if you put the money in the stock market, doesn't mean you're guaranteed that the money will come back more. You could actually lose money. So why is it the least expansionary? Well, there's this thing called the crowding out effect. So just imagine there's like, I don't know why I'm doing this without making a drawing. That's a horrible drawing. Alright. Imagine this is the supply of money. Well, actually, it's not aggregate demand. Here's your demand for cash. Well, all of a sudden, if the government decides that they want to spend more money, that increases demand for money. What do you notice happens to the cost of money? Or in this case, the interest rate. IR. It goes up, right? That's in essence what the crowding effect does. So when the government hogs a resource, in this case money, that leaves less money available for everyone else, and it drives up the price of that money. And you know, if the cost of money is higher, well, do businesses have an incentive to invest or do things? No. So that's why it's the least expansionary. And you also got to think about, like, who's better at allocating resources? Is it the free market or the government? Well, I'm hoping you realize that, as an economist and someone studying economics in Australia, you would realize that the free market does a better job of allocating resources, and the government does the other 20%. So if you are going to sell bonds to Australian investors, you just better hope that the government is using our money, actually, yeah, the Australian people's money that they borrowed from, to provide something that the free market couldn't do. Or else, you know, it's just a waste of money. The free market could have used it better and provided more GDP for our economy and improved our living standards even more. Anyway, enough rambling on that. Next we got selling bonds to overseas investors. Yeah, you could do this, but it'll cause the AUD to appreciate, because you got to realize that these foreigners need to buy these bonds in Australian dollars, so that will raise the demand for the AUD relative to supply and cause it to appreciate. And if our dollar appreciates, what do you think happens to our net exports? Yeah, I'm hoping you realize that net exports go down, so AD goes down, so economic activity goes down. So, in the end, crew, using the RBA, using Australian people, using foreigners to fund government debt actually comes with its own list of pros and cons. Alright, and the government needs to figure out what percentage they're going to borrow where in order to minimize their damage. Because even the government can create failure. The last time I updated the stats, apparently 56% of the government securities is issued in 2017 compared to 76% in 2012. So, overseas markets owning the less of our government debt overall. Or, sorry, giving the government money overall. I wonder how much lower it is today. So how do you deal with a budget surplus? So, the government has more money than they need to use. They could leave it in, you know, an exchange settlement account, earn some interest there from the RBA. Or they could use that extra funds to repay their government debt. So right now we have about over $800 billion in net government debt. the last time we were debt free was like back in, just before the pandemic. No, sorry, just before the GFC, around 2008 or 9. Under the Labour government, we demolished whatever savings that the Liberals gave us, and ever since then we've been in a deficit. And the government debt went from 0 all the way to $800 billion. It's unbelievable. But is debt really that bad? Yeah, I'll leave it up to you to decide. So, the future funds, as of March, there's $250 billion sitting there. And each one of these future funds has X amount of dollars sitting there, just ready to go whenever, you know, someone has something they can spend on medical research. They can dig into those funds. Alright, let's move on. So now you know how they use the surplus. They could pay back their debts, or top up future funds so there's more money in the future to help future generations, you know, increasing into temporal efficiency. So we need to look at the relationship between budget outcomes and net government debt. So this is from a CPAP paper back in the day. I know this information is outdated, but I don't know where the hell they got this chart. They probably made it themselves, and I wish they make a new one so we can update this picture. But anyway, moving on. Surplus. You get a notice that... Oh, actually, we should backtrack one bit. Underlying budget deficits, it says here right hand side. And it says net government debt left hand side. So this black line, you got to look at the left axis for the numbers, and these bars, you look at the right axis for these numbers. So you can see we had surplus of like what's that, about $18,000 million, and then we had a bigger surplus of around $20,000 million. So if you look here, every time we made a surplus, our net government debt actually went negative. We know it's negative because we have to look at the left hand side, and the zero line's here, and you can see as the surplus grew, the negative number became bigger. This negative number here represents our savings, and as soon as we ran a deficit in 2008 and 9, you know, because the GFC was starting to take hold of our economy, we burnt through those savings, and by the time we got to 2009-10, we made an even bigger deficit, and guess what? We ran out of savings to use, so the government had to start borrowing money. And you can see here, in 2011 to 12 to 12 to 13, the deficit decreased, but net government debt doesn't fall. There's a big error in people's perception. They think when government deficits get smaller, it means government debt is actually shrinking. No, government debt is still growing, it's just growing slower. Alright, so you can see here, this line just ever so slightly on the smallest like incline is going up. And then we ran a massive deficit, and you can see it just spikes up again. And every deficit since then makes it grow and grow, and you can see as soon as we start slowing down the deficits, the slope starts to become more gradual. And it's not until you run your surplus is where the net government debt starts to actually go down. That's the relationship between budget outcomes and net government debt. Alright? A surplus will reduce net government debt. A deficit will increase government debt. A reduction in our deficit will still increase government debt. Just remember those, please. Alright, automatic stabilizers. Also known as the cyclical component of the budget. Really like this part. So these are things that occur naturally within the budget without the government having to do anything. That's why it's called automatic. So this definition here, this first stop point, is a perfect definition to note down. I think this is from the CPAP textbook. I forgot what it's called. Economic Fundamentals? I think that's what it's called. Best definition ever. Used it since day one. Haven't gone wrong since. So when we're looking at the cyclical component, we're generally looking at taxes and welfare payments. So for example, in the business cycle, at the peak, normally because businesses are doing so well and people are spending a lot of money in the economy, things are thriving. Company taxes should increase, GST receipts should increase, and personal income taxes should increase because there's so many people working. So naturally they're pulling more money from the economy. And at the same time, they won't be making that much social welfare payments because Most people will have a job. Very few won't have a job. So their payments for, you know, job seeker, for example, would be very minimal. So, if the government's collecting more tax revenue and doing less spending, if you can remember back to your circular flow model, it means overall we have a leakage occurring in our economy. So when a leakage occurs, what happens to economic activity? Well, I'm hoping you realize it goes down. And that's the beauty of automatic stabilizers. When the economy is running hot, it's automatically pulling money out of the economy and spending very little to try and cool it down, naturally, on its own. And when it hits a bottom, naturally the government will be collecting very little tax income because, well, economic activity has slowed, right? So businesses won't be experiencing as many sales as before, so they don't have as much money to give to the government from their profits. At the same time, they're probably laid off workers or have very minimal workers on board, so personal income taxes will take a fall. And when it comes to welfare payments, they're most likely going to increase because of the higher rates of unemployment and also people working very few hours in order to maintain a dignified level of living. So all these conditions causes expenditure to rise while revenues to fall. So overall you get an injection happening in the economy, and that helps us go back to an expansionary phase in the business cycle. And that's it. So it works in a counter-cyclical way to manage economic activity, because they want to make sure we're in between, what's the GDP goal again? Around 3 to 3.5%. So they want to make sure we're somewhere here, where my mouse is hovering. Too much, too little, just right. So we're going to keep aiming to hit this spot. Alright? And also, probably a good thing to note that when you have really massive economic activity, you tend to run a surplus or a smaller deficit. And once you hit a trough, you tend to run a really big deficit, and you tend to run smaller deficit as economic activity rises. Alright? So next up, discretionary stabilizers, also known as the structural component of the budget. So these are, you know, what Jim and this is what Chalmers and Albanese think about when it comes to how they're going to improve economic activity throughout the year. So yeah, automatic stabilizers work, but they're not 100% foolproof in order to fix the problems we have in our economy. Automatic stabilizers is just like a blanket fix. Discretionary is where they target specific sectors in our economy to make us thrive. So we're going to look at some of these stabilizers later. But everything practically announced in the budget, actually everything announced in the budget, is a discretionary stabilizer. So you probably heard about, you know, the changes they're making to superannuation. Yeah, that's a discretionary stabilizer. So sometimes students get confused. They're thinking taxes. Alright, yeah, they know it's an automatic stabilizer, but then they get confused as to why it's also a discretionary stabilizer. Well, taxes is a discretionary stabilizer if the government makes changes to the way the tax structure works. For example, I think next year, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're removing one of the tax brackets. So it makes a flatter tax curve. I think the 37% tax bracket's getting removed. When that comes into play, that is a discretionary stabilizer, and also impacts our automatic stabilizers because the amount of revenue we automatically receive will be changing. But it's discretionary because they deliberately change the way the taxes work. I hope that makes sense to you. Alright, next you need to know what is expansionary versus contractionary budgetary policy. Just so you remember the words. Expansionary means expand economic activity. The best way to expand economic activity is running deficits. Why? Because you're injecting more money into the economy than taking away from the economy. And contractionary is usually associated with surpluses because this is where leakages are greater than injections, slowing down AD, slowing down our economy, hence contractionary in nature. Contractionary phase, contractionary nature, expansionary phase, expansionary nature. Get the gist? Awesome. And here's your little, you know, in-betweeners. So if you have a deficit the 1 year, so if we go here, if if you have a deficit like this and you run a smaller deficit the next year, that's considered less contractionary stance. And then go from a small deficit to a large deficit is considered more expansionary. Sorry, I take that back. Running this deficit to this smaller deficit is less expansionary. Less expansionary. It's still expansionary in nature because they're spending more than they're taking away. So less expansionary, and then when you go from small to big, it's more expansionary. So going from a small surplus to a bigger surplus, that's more contractionary. And going from a, I wish I had one here, a big surplus to a small surplus is less contractionary. And going from a deficit to a surplus is going to a contractionary phase. And going from a surplus to a deficit is an expansionary phase. Alright, we covered all the bits and details there. Moving on. Budget overview. So these links here are my best friends when it comes to analysing the federal budget every year, generally when I teach economics. So I like looking at the ABCs, winners and losers. I like going through the Guardian's point of view. Or, their complete guide. I'll show you all these links now. So if you want to click on this one, budget statements, here it is. You can look at the raw facts and figures from the government, but trust me, it's the most boring. You get something like this, and it's just pages and pages and pages of crap. Like, a lot of crap that I don't read. It's not worth my time. 37 pages. Unbelievable. Alright. The next link. We got here the actual budget itself. budget.gov.au. And here it is. This is the government's marketing spiel to explain to you why they're spending where they are, the discretionary stabilizers, or the structural component of the budget, and why they're doing it, and how it's meant to help you improve your living standards. Alright, so for example, delivering cost of living relief, we click on here. These are the things they're doing. Energy bill relief, price caps on the gas market, yeah, that's really helping. Household energy upgrade fund, better information on energy saving opportunities. Oh, there you go. Reducing reducing asymmetric information, reducing out-of-pocket healthcare costs. Like, look, it's all there. All right, take a look. With the Guardian, the complete. I like this one too, because if you're looking for a particular, topic, for example, defense, you hit that and they give you all the spending that they're doing on defense in that budget. Or if you click on taxes, bam! You can see all the tax changes that are occurring in our economy based on this year's discretionary changes. So please, take a look at the Guardian, the federal budget website, and you also got the ABC version. So this one will take a few seconds to load, but it'll get there. Bada bing, bada boom. No, it didn't happen. What's going on? There we go. That took a while. So for example, if something catches your eye, it's like, oh, defense. What's happening with defense? Bam! $11 billion will be spent on defense over the next four years. Boom! 4.5 billion just dedicated to nuclear-powered submarines. Gotta love those powered submarines. And then $7.8 billion on existing projects will also be scrapped. Well, there you go. It tells you a bit of details on everything. So, these are your go-to pages. These are your bounded reference. These are your cheat guides. Take a look. Find some policies. I generally tell students to try and memorize 4 policies. Very broad policies, so you can use it for any situation. For example, if you're going to try and explain how it influences the goal of strong sustainable economic growth, well, you could say here, this spending on defense, $11 billion, will cause AD to go up and increase GDP and bring us back towards our target. Because right now we're at what, 2.3% GDP? Well, this spending might get us back closer to the sustainable and strong rate of 3 to 3.5%. You can click on childcare and see $4.7 billion being spent here. Sorry, not being spent, being subsidized. So that will increase discretionary income of households who have children. And that will increase AD. and that will bring us closer to our goal again, a strong sustainable economic activity. But if we're talking about unemployment rates, sorry, the full employment goal, right now unemployment's at 3.5%. This goal here might actually make the unemployment rates even lower and bring us further away from achieving that Nauru point. And if we talk about inflation, same deal. We currently have 6% inflation. This change will actually make the inflation goal worse off, and the RBA is probably going to raise rates as a result of this. These are just some of the ideas that you could get from just looking at one policy. So yes, try to keep 4 in the back of your head. Try to memorize the numbers too, because they'll make a huge difference. It shows the examiner that you really know your stuff. Alright. Oh god, I swear we were further along. Let's go. So yeah, here's 5 that I would probably use in my recommendations, but you know, please talk to your teacher, look at through those budgets papers that I've just sent you, or you've just seen examples of, and make your own choices. But yeah, these are the ones I recommend, like the job seeker increase, so extra $40 a fortnight for certain people. You got the superannuation tax concession reduced, so if you have over $3 million you won't get a great tax rebate anymore. You actually pay more taxes. Clamp down tax avoidance, so this will help reduce, you know, the government deficit over the next few years, because they actually get collectible money from people who are avoiding taxes. There's the childcare subsidy changes that I just mentioned, and defence spending, because you know, it's been big news. ScoMo last year, you know, upsetting the French about the submarine deal, and I'm pretty sure there was a moment where, why do I have memories of God, I forgot his name now. The guy that looks like Voldemort. What's his name? Not Liberal Prime Minister, Liberal leader today. I forgot his name. It's the guy who lives in Queensland. Looks like Homer Simpson. Come on. I should put Shadow leader. What the hell did I click on? Shadow leader Australia. Man, that'll be better. Peter Dutton, of course. How could I forget that guy's name? I feel silly. This guy. Alright. Anyway. I'm having a bit too much fun here. Fiscal drag or bracket creep. Oh. Not a fan of this, but it's worth explaining just in case it comes up. So, you know how you earn a certain amount of income, and you pay a certain amount of tax, and as you earn more income, you go to a higher tax bracket? Well, fiscal drag or bracket creep is in association with inflation. So let's just say, you know, inflation's increased 6%, which it has. In order to ensure that your living standards are the same from this year to next year, or sorry, from last year to this year, you would need your income to increase by 6% at least to maintain your current, to maintain last year's living standards. But the problem is, some people, when they increase their income by 6%, they actually move to a higher tax bracket, and that higher tax bracket actually takes away more money away from their pockets. So overall, their real disposable income is lower, and in turn, their living standards fall apart. And that's what fiscal drag or bracket creep is. It's where you try to earn more money in order to keep up with inflation, but by keeping up with the inflation, you actually move to a higher tax bracket that penalizes you further and brings you further away from maintaining your spending to the rate of inflation that we're having. So please, you already know my channel. Just find the video on bracket creep and take a look. I do like the full mathematical breakdown of it. Oh god, I'm on draw function. That might explain a lot. So if you click on this, I try to simplify it. It's not my best work, but it goes for 4 minutes. You can check it out. It's like the most popular video I ever made, 640 views. Please, yeah, take a look at it. It explains it better than my 30-second breakdown there. Well, actually, maybe that 30-second breakdown was better. I don't remember what I said. I hope it was coherent at this point. Getting tired. Apologies. So strengths of budgetary policy. You just need to memorize at least 3. I always tell my students. So go with the target specific sectors of the economy, because monetary policy can't do that. So especially with what's been happening in our economy lately, cost of living crisis, they're finding ways to help Australia's most vulnerable in order to live a dignified standard of living by give them increased welfare payments, subsidise electricity, etc., etc. They also injected money to the the arts sector of our economy, because they were heavily impacted by the pandemic. So hopefully that is the strength of budgetary policy, targeting specific sectors in our economy. So right now they're trying to, especially last year, they'll try to tackle, actually sorry, I take that back, especially when Labor stepped in and released their October budget, they knew that inflation was due to supply side conditions. So all their policies in the October budget were all supply side condition policies to improve inflation in the future. Whether or not it works, we'll find out. The problem with investing money into aggregate supply is you don't feel the benefits automatically. It takes time. Anyway, moving on. So yes, you can target a lot of goals compared to monetary policy. The impact lag is relatively short. For example, during the pandemic, as soon as they launched JobKeeper and JobSeeker onto the economy, the immediates were felt almost immediately. Like within the fortnight, people's paychecks were higher. Effective stimulating AD, my goodness, it was our saving grace. If the government did do what they did during the pandemic, our recession numbers or our GDP levels and numbers for 2020 and 21 would have been significantly lower than they already were. The budget has automatic stabilizers to reduce volatility in the business cycle or economic cycle. That's true. Remember, it works in a counter-cyclical way, so it smooths out the variations. So if people know where the economy is heading in the future, they're more confident in making decisions now to improve their futures. Another great thing about budgetary policy is it needs to pass through lower and upper house. So it goes through, checks and balances to make sure that whatever our government tries to pass is actually in the best nature for our country and not just to win votes, sometimes. And then the last one is open to public scrutiny, so they have to publicly announce what they're doing, and us, the public, get to see what the hell's up, and then think to ourselves, oh yeah, that's a good idea, or oh no, that's a bad idea, and then, vote them out eventually. So yeah, those are the strengths of budgetary policy. The weaknesses are sometimes those political hurdles can be a problem. Like right now, Albanese wants to pass a social housing policy. I think he wants to build and construct houses, but the upper house is blocking it. The Greens and the Liberals are particularly not fond of this policy because they feel like they're not doing enough. Well, at least from the Greens' perspective, they feel like this housing policy needs to do more than what they're offering. I don't know what the Liberals' stance on this. I haven't actually read onto it, to be honest. This is what I've heard from the news and what I remember off the top of my head. Next thing, political bias. Sometimes budgetary policy is put into place just to win votes rather than fix the economy, and nothing could be more true than what happened last year because it was just the most recent election we had. In the federal budget, I think they released it in March last year, early, just before election, just to get it over and done with and hopefully win votes. They were throwing all this extra stimulus, like low middle income tax offsets, giving more to them, giving more money overall. And, it was to try, some people say it's to try and win votes because if they were looking based on economic conditions, inflation was already climbing outside the target range. And we know that, inflation blew to 8% last year. Why the hell did the government give us more money to spend? It makes no sense. And some people would say it's because they just want to win votes rather than win the election. But luckily, the strength of monetary policy is it's not tied to political bias, and they were smart enough to raise the cash rate just before the election, and unfortunately that was the downfall of the Liberal Party. But it was in the best interest of our economy, after all. Implementation lag. So if it needs to filter through the Senate, it could take a while before these policies actually get through. Greatest example I've got, which is not really contemporary anymore, is the superannuation changes. You probably noticed that superannuation has increased steadily from 10% to 10.5% to 11%, while those increases were meant to happen a lot sooner. And it was because the Senate kept blocking these changes that these changes didn't happen earlier, and they were meant to be bigger too. Budgetary policy happens every May, so it's only done once a year, where monetary policy they can do it every month, well, almost every month. So it's inflexible, but you know, during times of disaster they do release mini budgets. I mean, last year Albanese's government did release a mini budget in October with their proposed changes. During the pandemic year, they announced a mini COVID budget to try and fix the problem that we were suffering during 2020. Like, all these sort of things happen. And even during the GFC, there was a miniature budget. That's where Kevin Rudd gave most Australians who were working like $900. Never forget, those were some great times. Lastly, budgetary policy is less effective at restraining AD because they can't stop us from spending our money. I mean, look what ScoMo did during the pandemic. He told us to stop panic buying, stop hoarding. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, but we kept going to the supermarkets and completely clearing the shelves, especially of toilet paper. So yeah, not very good at restraining AD. And that's it. That's the budget. Oh, man. Mission complete. Well, so I think. I'm going to save this. Let's go through this Word document. Make sure I've covered all the dot points. So we look at sources of government revenues. Yes. We looked at the different types of taxes. Yes. And revenues from the sale of government assets. Yes. Just remember, the government assets that we have, or something I can think of from the top of my head, is the NBN and Australia Post. We haven't sold them yet. But they could be. I know the NBN is definitely being sold in the future. I just have no idea about Australia Post, if that's ever going to be sold. Pardon me. We've gone through expenses, difference between current and capital transfer payments. We look at budget outcomes. Yes. We look at the underlying cash balance, including a definition of that versus headline. And we also looked at proportion of GDP. Check. We looked at ways they finance the deficit and utilize the surplus. Check. Relationship between budget outcomes and level of government debt. Check. It was done through that beautiful picture where I was showing you the bars versus the lines. Automatic stabilizers influencing AD. Check. Discretionary stabilizers influencing AD. Check. The effects of automatic and discretionary changes on the budget outcome and government debt. Yes, we've already said that, you know, if you run a deficit, it increases government debt. And if you run a surplus, it decreases government debt. Perfect. We looked at the stances. Yes. Expansionary versus contractionary. We looked at initiatives over the past 2 years. Yes, we looked at a couple of them, and I even gave you examples of how it impacts domestic goals and living standards. Fantastic. So yeah. And lastly, strengths and weaknesses of budgetary policy. Yes. And the influence it has on our domestic goals. Well, I didn't really go through that, but I'm hoping. Actually, I did give you some examples. For example, that Kevin Rudd one, or the. Yeah, I've given you examples. Anyways, that's it for me. If you have any questions, please leave a comment or send me a message. You know how to get in contact with me. Have a good night. See yous around.